Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Robert, who is an advanced photographer from Missouri. Robert says that he took this image with a Nikon D300 12-24 zoom and at f/16 and ISO 200 exposed the file for 1/10 of a second. This was taken at Olympic National Park. Robert said one of the things that really drew him to the scene was just the fact that the boat looked like it had just been left there. So they're sort of asking a question about why the boat wasn't tied up and who had just been in the boat, and I definitely get the sense of that kind of story from the picture. Robert has a technical question too in his backstory about HDR, extending dynamic range in a picture. He says because of the moving water and the moving clouds, he was sort of afraid to do in camera multiple brackets and then blend those. So what he did was he took the exposure that I already described and then converted multiple images out of the raw converter and then used an HDR program. And created what he calls a quasi-HDR, and I think that's a good description. HDR is high dynamic range, and when we say HDR to people that know what it is, those images tend to have, because of the super extended dynamic range, kind of a surreal look to them, almost like illustration. And this just looks more like an image that was taken with a split neutral density filter, or something that is actually a closer approximation to what the eye would see, because our eye sees very long dynamic range, about 12 stops, and the camera, whether it's digital or film, can only deal with a range of about 5 to 6 or 7 stops, depending on with a film camera if you're shooting slide or color negative. And one of the questions he had was, did this work? And I think it did. When I look at this, I don't get a sense of anything strange as far as HDR or something that's been over processed. And I think it's a really good example of the power of RAW, and how if you get a pretty good exposure, sort of a compromise exposure in a scene that has a lot of dynamic range, of how far we can go with multiple RAW conversions and being able to change the exposure after the fact. So love that part of the backstory. Let's get right into the critique. The other thing that I like about this image is I just like the way that I move around in the image. As far as a wide angle shot, I have a real simple way for myself to come into the image. The boat as the subject really gets my eye. It exists in a real nice negative space here, so I can move around it. I can go out to the dock, and then that leads me out to the mountains. And then once I get to the mountains, you have the clouds out here with a negative space above them. So in other words, there's really a real nice way to move all the way through the image and come back. There are some real nice diagonals here, even though Robert is shooting straight into the horizon here. You have other diagonals in the scene that give it a great sense of depth. The idea that the boat is turned here to the water is really nice in terms of the shoreline here being straight across, and right here where the lake meets the mountains being straight across. This helps to break up that feeling of things flattening out or sort of being trapped in space shapes that are square or rectangular, and sort of reminding us that this is a flat media that we're looking at. These diagonals really help to move us past those places that are flat lines, and obviously breaking the line is a big deal, and that really helps too, and the dock is doing that out here. So it's something to really think about, in shots where you end up with this real hard line, unless there's some implied movement from one subject below the line to above the line to get us to move past it. These kinds of just straight in horizons in the shot, or even vertical lines in a shot that run parallel to the edge of the frame, can be real sticking points. Some really neat color going on here. It's interesting. You've got the blue and orange color complement up here, and then you have this really wild color complementary pair. Instead of primary green and primary red, you have yellow green and yellow red as almost perfect color complements. These sort of almost neon colors or posterized colors, and that's where I kind of want to start with the critique, because for me, as much as this composition really works for me on a lot of levels from a color standpoint, it's like two different pictures. This is such a wild color complementary pair. The colors are so vibrant, and instead of being sort of these natural colors like pure green and pure red that we're used to seeing in nature, this is more like something you see at a fashion show or on a poster, and so it really takes on a lot of visual weight psychologically for me as the viewer, because instead of being a color that's connected to nature, and blue and orange are big time, this is one of the most prevalent complementary color pairs that we see in nature because of the colors of light. On partly cloudy to clear days, almost every day of our life, whether we ever know anything about color theory or not, we're seeing blue and orange as a color complementary pair. We see it in all kinds of other situations too. Just the warm light at the end of the day versus the cool light in the shadows. It's right there. We see it all of the time. And this is one that we don't see much at all in nature, if ever. And so not only do you have two complementary color pairs competing with each other, you have two ideas that are psychologically very different. And so as much as colors in different part of the scenes are exciting, overall to me the colors are not going together well here. And the other thing that I think about big time when we start looking at shots that represent archetypes that are classical, that we've seen a lot, Robert's done such a beautiful job here of composing something that's very classical, just in terms of the placement of the boat and the things I've already talked about. When I start to look at a shot like that, it's almost like the difference between formal symmetry and dynamic symmetry. It's like if I start to get close to formal symmetry, then I go for it, unless I'm trying to create a lot of tension for the viewer. And I'm hardly ever trying to do that. That's just not where I'm coming from, you know. I like to venture into things that are sort of out there on the edge, but my sensibilities are more towards pop sensibilities, and my sensibilities are more towards things that everybody can appreciate, whether they're appreciating it because culturally it's liked a lot by everybody, but more often than not it has more to do with just the idea of things that we share in common that are connected to some kind of a natural law that already hold us together. And thinking about that, when I look at an image like this and it's close to being this classical design, I really start to look at balance from top to bottom and balance from corner to corner and side to side. And what happens for me when I think about that in just different subjects is that you have one real dominant subject that's very visually exciting in an area that around it is super visually simple. One field of information here, just a pattern of rocks, and behind the boat another simple pattern of information, the texture of the water. Up here we have simple field of information, but then two subjects, and the second subject is over here on the side of the image where there's an enormous amount of visual weight. The left-hand part of the frame is heavier than the right-hand part of the frame because of the way we read and the way we've been trained to look at media before anything happens in this frame. Now we add this second cloud that has a lot of movement. We have the mountains balanced by this, but we have this is not balanced by anything over here, and now we have the boat moving in this direction, and the majority of the boat is on this side of the frame. And so for me, this starts to do two things. It starts to tip me out of the image over here. It also makes the top very incongruent with the bottom. And so this is an image where I like it so much, and if you're open to changing the editorial content, first thing I do is just get rid of the color. I like this 100 times better in black and white. And then once I get rid of the color, then I get rid of that second cloud, and now I have something that's very lyrical from top to bottom and very balanced and much more simple. And then, you know, from here I just made some changes, levels and curves, to tighten this up even more. I like high contrast and to sort of push it in more of a graphical direction, because the boat to me is so graphical to begin with, and the grays are still a little flat here. I could keep working on this, but this is where we started and this is where we ended up. And for me, this feels a lot more connected from top to bottom. I would love to hear what other people have to say about it. Just want to show you one other thing. When it comes to getting rid of a cloud like that, there are all different kinds of ways to do it. I've done it pretty quick, so there's still a little bit of a rough feeling to it, but if you didn't know what I had done before, and I worked on this a little bit more and we printed it very big, there'd be no way to tell what I'd done. And it involves coming into the clone stamp and healing an area by using an opacity of 10% and sampling an area here in the image that's sort of homogeneous, and then stamping over the part you want to get rid of over and over and over and over again. And that's what I did here to get rid of that cloud. And so just wanted to mention that. Clone stamp, grabbing an area that's simple and then cloning over an area that in the image that needs to go away. And if you didn't have this simple area, you could go to another image and bring in a chunk of that image on a layer and just use it as a cloning palette to clone out of, just as long as the tone or the colors or whatever are pretty close, and then heal that area of the image out. All right, Really want to say a huge thank you to Lewis. This is a stunning image. Really appreciate him sharing it with us here at the Mindful Eye. Hope to see you again real soon on the Mindful Eye's Daily Critique.